worship the ancestors. When the followers of the Keynes in Papua New Guinea laid out food offerings in the specially constructed temples, they hoped their ancestors will be pleased by the hard work and good intentions that went into the creation and presentation of their gifts. The goal was to create a feeling of obligation among the ancestors and a longing to be reunited with their descendants, thereby expedite thereby expediting the miraculous return of the dead that all Keynes followers earnestly anticipated. As we have seen, however, preparing and leaving offerings to please and placate the ancestors was an arduous business. Every day arduous was an arduous business. Every day of the week, for months after month and year after year, Keynes communities laid out offerings to the ancestors in the village cemetery temple. But they also laid out offerings in other kinds of temples. One of these was named after a prominent founder of the movement and needed to be tended twice a week. Another kind of temple associated with individual families and their ancestors also needed to be regularly tended. And in addition, all Keynes members needed to turn up at lengthy meetings resembling church services in a specially constructed village hall twice a week, not to mention the many other rituals that needed to be conducted individually on a day-to-day basis, as well as numerous abstentions associated with special holy days, 2 per week, and states of menstrual pollution, which typically menstrual abstention, as well as numerous abstentions associated with special holy days and states of menstrual pollution, which typically affected at least some of the women in the village at any given time. In short, the need to satisfy the unremitting demands of the ancestors for constant displays of attention, devotion, and concern led to highly routinized forms of ritual in the Keynes.
Unremitting.
All these beliefs had their foundations in pan-human religious institutions concerning life after death. The Keynes concept of ancestor was grounded in the idea that minds can be separated from bodies and can continue to live on even after the physical shell was being buried in the ground and is rotting away. A belief that, as I explained earlier, is likely an expression of the way we naturally reason about mental states, and particularly higher order cognitive functions such as memories, beliefs, and desires. But the Keynes harnessed this intuition in new ways to motivate feelings of obligation to the ancestors that in turn motivated high levels of ritual conformism. What was salient about ancestor psychology was that it demanded fastidious respect, care, and attention from the living, such that adherents were compelled to carry out their duties with the utmost attention to detail, and that the ancestors would know and remember whether they had done so, or had fallen short in some respect. In addition, ancestors were attributed some mildly counterintuitive properties, such as the ability to pass through walls, a breach of intuitive physics, and to see directly into people's hearts and minds, a breach of intuitive psychology. These were not just any old counterintuitive properties, however. Each had powerful social effects. They indicated that the ancestors not only expected their descendants to carry out their ritual duties conscientiously, but they could also check up on them, keeping the entire community under continuous surveillance by being able to move around at will and to see who was planning to cut corners or shirk their obligations. As such, Keynes beliefs in ancestors provided a formidable method of enforcing ritual routinization across the movement as a whole. The desire to please and placate ancestors helped to transform followers of Keynes into mass conformists, ensuring that the movement's beliefs and practices were maintained intact. But Keynes followers were not the first to stumble upon these methods of enforcing conformity of belief and practice. Ancestors are the guardians of tradition in many regions of the world. Societies that venerate ancestors also respect their elders, who know the most about how things were done in the past. The elders are pleased when we follow their cherished traditions, and personally offended and punitive when we don't. You could say that ancestors are elders writ large. They expect us to carry out all our ritual duties and observe the group's traditions to the letter, just like the elders, but they are more acutely offended than even the elders will be when we don't discharge our obligations. Moreover, they have greater powers to punish the lazy and disrespectful among us. Ancestor worship, however, is not necessarily a moralizing form of religion, because the dead often don't really care how we treat the living. We can be as deceitful,
conniving,
selfish, and aggressive as we like towards each other, so long as we are respectful and dutiful towards the dear departed, and unlike moralizing gods imagined to be all-knowing, all-powerful, and always right, ancestors are commonly seen as fallible, capricious, and inconsistent. They might benignly overlook some ritual faux pas, Faux pas.
Faux pas.
Faux pas. Oh, French. Some ritual faux pas today, and yet shower sickness and pestilence on you tomorrow for even the most minor of oversights. The powerfully intuitive and socially useful nature of these ideas help to explain their early emergence in world history. Indeed, they seem to have played an increasingly important role in the way group identities became established in the Neolithic. This is to be seen in the archaeological evidence for growing preoccupation and secondary burial practices as farming societies grew in size, suggesting an increasingly preoccupation with the propitiation.
Propitiation.
Propitiation. With the propitiation of ancestors, whereas primary burials are occasions for the interment of corpses. Interment of corpses, usually soon after death. Secondary burials involve the removal of remains much later, sometimes years later, for the purposes of further ritual treatment. The way this was carried out in ancient prehistory in ancient prehistory varied enormously across different cultural groups, ranging from the stripping away of soft tissue from the human skeleton using blades through the putrefaction of the corpse to deflesh the bones more slowly.
Putrefaction.
Putrefaction of the corpse to deflesh the bones more slowly. In some cases, it was not the skeleton remains that were venerated, but the ashes of incinerated corpses or other durable objects associated with the dead. Whatever form such action took, however, they always seem to have been about creating an endurable social relationship with the dead, via some part of their remains that could be preserved, providing a point of connection with the everlasting spirits. Secondary burial practices are remarkably widespread in the human past, from skull cults at some of the very earliest Neolithic sites in Palestine. Philistine, to the ancient tombs of Ireland, and from the funerary enclosures of northern Israel to the cemeteries of ancient China. The world's earliest farmers were clearly very concerned about maintaining relationships there with their dead. Bones and stones are often all that remain of these ancient societies, but the bones in particular reveal a seemingly endless variety of ways of disposing of corpses, such as deflection and reflashing them, removing heads, jaw, 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 jaw,
jaw,
jaw, jawbones or other body parts, and carefully placing them in significant locations, dressing and undressing the skeleton, presenting them with offerings, painting them in ochre, or placing shells in their eye sockets. Consider the houses, especially the history houses of catalogue that we encounter in the last chapter, in which the dead were buried and reburied repeatedly over the course of multiple generations. This desire to connect with the ancestors, even those who died before anyone handling their bones had been born, suggests a growing concern with the group's origin. It seems clear that early farmers felt strong obligations to their ancestors. It therefore seems highly plausible that this would have acted as an enforcing mechanism when it came to the faithful performance of rituals and maintenance of the revered tradition.
revere,
revered tradition. But what is particularly striking is the extent to which this shift is associated with the transition to agriculture. Although the details of how ancestor worship was conducted and conceptualized remain obscure, analysis of the behavior of traditional societies surviving today suggests that the increasing role of the dead in ancient societies were closely related to the rise of farming. Using large samples of ethnographic data on modern societies to infer the relationship between agriculture and ancestor worship during the Neolithic, and deploying sophisticated statistical techniques to reconstruct the evolutionary trajectories of ancient societies. Researchers have argued that the veneration of ancestors really took off with the intensification of farming practices. The link between ancestor worship and agriculture may be observed also in the ethnographic record. For example, one study comparing 114 societies have shown that hunter-gatherers are the least likely to worship their ancestors, subsistence farmers more so, and advanced agrarians most of them. This may partly be explained by the usefulness of ancestors in sorting out legal matters. After all, claims to ownership of agricultural land and other resources are commonly based on prior possession of use, demonstrated with reference to traceable ancestry and its physical proofs. In traditional land disputes the world over, opposing sides appealing to principles of descendant inheritance, maintaining in maintaining close relationship with the dead is therefore important, and the best way to show it is through the observance of ritual obligations. But in addition to this, beliefs and demanding ancestors will likely have motivated people to fulfill their obligations to living kinsmen and in-laws. This would have been particularly crucial in the wake of transition to agriculture, because such duties were necessary for the production of surpluses, which, as we saw in the last chapter, were vital to survival in a household-based economy. The veneration of ancestors had ramifications well beyond the realm of economics and law, however. Ramification. Well beyond the realms of economics and law, however, in offering a supernaturally sanctioned method of policing adherence to the group's rituals and norms, ancestor worship helped standardize and preserve the society's cultural traditions, in turn allowing it to stabilize and grow. But in time, that will bring unexpected consequences. At first, ancestor worship will have allowed relatively egalitarian social institutions to flourish. For several thousand years after the invention of farming, communities grew larger and denser, but not much more hierarchical. Yet, as farming intensified and surpluses became more abundant, ancestor worship turned into something much darker. Instead of simply obeying rules that were accepted by all and enforced via peer pressure, ideas about the appeasement of ancestors came to be associated with increasingly oppressive forms of tactile enforcement. Before that could happen, though, a fundamental change needed to occur in the way people thought about leadership. We needed to make the leap from simply respecting people because of their achievements to bowing down to them because of supernatural qualities and powers thought to be inherited by birth. This way of thinking eventually led to the sanctification of elites and the deification of rulers.
Deification
Deification of rulers.